Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning, this chilly morning. My name is Linda Barrett, and I'm the manager of the Genealogy, Local History, and Archives Unit here at the Fort Worth Public Library. And we're really happy to be having this presentation. And we were just talking a few minutes ago about the silver lining of the pandemic is that we're all Zoom competent now. And so this winter storm, even though the library is closed until noon, we're still able to carry on with this, and we're really excited about today's presentation. And I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Leanna Schooley. She is the Executive Director of the Center for Texas Studies at TCU.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Linda. Wendy will be joining us momentarily. When we discovered that we were not going to be able to get her here from Brackettville, we did have a little worry, but we were able to fall back on the Zoom, and we are so glad to continue with our regular scheduled programming this time. I want to remind you that our Preserving Our Past lecture series is brought to us through the generosity of the Summerfield G. Roberts Foundation and the Summerlee Foundation. Some of you know, some of you may not know that you can follow us on Facebook or on Instagram at Center for Texas Studies at TCU. And there you'll find information about our upcoming programs, as well as lots of tidbits of Texas history, historical markers, other Texas history research and learning opportunities that we share with our audience. So be sure to check us out there. I want to mention that if you have to leave us midway through the program today, this program is being recorded and will be available on Zoom in roughly a week to 10 days. So it'll be available on the library's YouTube channel. So be sure to check it out there, and you'll find many of our other past programs in case you missed one. You can look those up there on the library's channel there too. Our next program is a little bit of a part two. Jessica Webb, who gave one of our most popular programs ever about Madams of Hell's Half Acre, will be returning to give us the second part of her research, which is about madams in San Antonio during that same late 19th century period and how it compared to Fort Worth Hell's Half Acre. So you will want to join us on March 5th for her very interesting part two of her story. A little housekeeping. I want to mention that you'll notice there is only a chat button at the bottom of your screen. So any questions or comments that you have, please post them in the chat. Feel free to post them anytime throughout the program, and we will address them all at the end. So seriously, just anytime once the question pops into your head, go ahead and type it in there. Let's see, I think that covers it. So let me introduce you to Wendy, who I met at a conference in Marathon this fall. She was one of several speakers on the multicultural history of the Big Bend region. And I have to tell you that when I heard her talk, I could not wait to ask her if she would be willing to come to Fort Worth to speak to all of you. Her program is a version of what she gave in Marathon, and it so beautifully talks about the efforts that she and other members of her community are making to preserve place, to preserve community, to even preserve language before it is lost. So she will be talking to us about Seminole Indians and the Black Seminole Indian Scouts. Wendy is a native of Brackettville, where many of the descendants of the Scouts settled. She has owned Zadi, and she may correct my pronunciation there, Zadi Amistad Editing and Writing Services since 2017, but she's worked as an independent contractor since 2007. Copy editing and writing is her day job, But since returning to Brackettville from college, she has been passionate about preserving Black Seminole history. She is a member of the community. She is a descendant herself, and it's very important to her to preserve that family heritage and the ancestors' legacy as well. You will hear her mention the elders in her community, and she actively preserves their stories. Something else, as I said, they're working on preserving the language. It is an Afro-Seminole Creole language that not too many people speak anymore. So she will talk about how they are working to preserve that. She is currently the secretary of the Seminole Indian Scouts Cemetery Association and bringing together lots of the descendants to share and work to preserve information. So with that, I want to introduce you to Wendy, and we will see you again when she wraps things up. So Wendy Goodloe.
Thank you so much, Leanna and Linda. Thank you so much for having me today. And before I begin, I just want to thank everybody that's here on the Zoom. The history of the Black Seminoles is something that is very important to me. And for you to be taking time out of your Saturday to listen to this talk is really humbling. So I hope that you enjoy what I have to say. And I feel like I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you. So please feel free to ask any. This is a very complex history that has a lot of moving parts to it. So it's not easy if this is the first time you're hearing about it to get everything in one take. So, you know, at the end, feel free to ask any questions and I will answer them to the best of my ability, or we'll send you in the right direction. So the title of my talk is The Black Seminoles of Texas and Mexico. All I want right now is each day for one more person to learn our history. This quote was by Miss Charles Emily Wilson. She lived from 1910 to 2006. And this is quoted in the book Our Land Before We Die by Jeff Gwynne. When most of us learned about slavery in school, we were taught that those who escaped ran north in search of freedom. The story of those who ran south is not as well known, and I hope y'all see what I just did there. I am a descendant of those who ran south. It is my honor to tell you the story of the Black Seminoles. Their story, in my humble opinion, is a truly and uniquely American story. The ethnogenesis of the Black Seminoles. One of my favorite quotes is by legendary filmmaker Haile Gerima, who said, "Many enslaved Africans didn't wait for Lincoln to free them." And this is true. For many of our enslaved forebears, as soon as they realized that their freedom was being taken from them, they began searching for ways to get it back. We know and have heard about the many lives lost to the sea during those harrowing and numerous voyages on slave ships. And if they survived that journey, as soon as their feet touched this unknown land known as America, many Africans began resisting, fighting, and running. They ran until they found refuge. La Florida. When the Spanish first arrived in Florida, there were, of course, already indigenous inhabitants. The idea was for these indigenous peoples to be forced into helping the Spanish protect their claim to this territory. Unfortunately, contact with Spaniards brought disease, and many of these early Native Americans succumbed to these illnesses. In addition, numerous attacks from American settlers brought about more death. Within a short amount of time, those original inhabitants had all but been wiped out. Following the near decimation of these original Floridian inhabitants, enslaved Africans and various Native American tribes were encouraged to seek refuge in Florida by Spanish authorities. It is believed that enslaved Africans had been finding freedom in Spanish Florida from as early as 1689. The Low Country of the United States. The majority of these formerly enslaved Africans or Maroons were Gullahs or Gullah Geechees, who were running from an area known as the Low Country region of the United States, or more specifically, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Northern Florida. Even though the group was enslaved, they lived in relative isolation from their white captors for long periods of time. This allowed this group of Africans from various parts of Central and West Africa to develop their own culture, which included their own language, which is an English-based Creole known as Gullah Geechee or Gullah Geechee. Initially, the Maroons who escaped into Florida lived apart from the Seminoles, who were a small group of Creeks that had separated from the larger group of Creeks because of a growing number of cultural and moral differences. There were also other smaller tribes that would eventually join this group that would become known as the Seminoles. The word Seminole is believed to come from the Creek or Muskogee word Seminole. The word Seminole may have been adopted from the Spanish word cimarron, which means runaway or wild one. And it's also believed that the word maroon comes from the Spanish word cimarron as well. By the early 19th century, the Maroons, who had established themselves as corn and rice farmers, and the Seminoles were in regular contact with each other. It is important to acknowledge that some Seminoles did practice slavery. It was not the chattel slavery that was practiced in Southern America by white slave owners, but it was slavery nonetheless. It was, however, more like a feudal taxation, since the Maroons typically lived in their own communities. During the 1820s, there were about 800 Maroons living among approximately 4,000 Seminoles. And historians point out that these Maroon settlements, which were often located on the outskirts of Seminole settlements, were highly militarized. In exchange for an annual tribute of livestock, crops, hunting, and war party obligations, Maroons found sanctuary among the Seminoles, who in turn acquired an important strategic ally in a sparsely populated region. The Maroons elected their own leaders and could amass wealth in cattle and crops. Most importantly, they bore arms for self-defense. Florida real estate records show that the Seminoles and Maroons owned large quantities of Florida land. Following the War of 1812, and just ahead of the Seminole Wars, the Maroon community became known as Black Seminoles. They were also called Seminole Negros by their white American enemies, and Estelusti, which means Black people, by their Native American allies. The Seminole Wars. The Seminole Wars were efforts by the United States to remove Seminoles and Black Seminoles from Florida, and there were three distinct wars. The First Seminole War. Successfully winning independence in the American Revolution emboldened American slaveholders, who now turned their attention to armed Black communities in La Florida. After switching from Spanish control to British, it was now under Spanish control again. This, however, did not stop the United States from seeking to capture and return so-called Black fugitives under the Treaty of New York of 1790. This was the first treaty ratified under the Confederation. After the War of 1812, General Andrew Jackson attacked Fort Negro. He did this because he wanted to disrupt the Black Seminoles who had set up communities in Florida. He would go on to lead several excursions into La Florida, ignoring the protests of the Spanish and the British. During the First Seminole War, which took place from approximately 1816 to 1819, breaking up these Black Seminole communities was one of Jackson's main objectives. Unfortunately, Spain was unable to protect its territory, so La Florida was eventually ceded to the United States per the Adams-Onis, excuse my pronunciation of that, Oni Treaty of 1819. In 1821, the official transfer took place. According to the terms of the 1823 Treaty of Moultrie Creek between the United States and the Seminole Nation, the Seminoles were removed from northern Florida to a reservation in the center of the Florida Peninsula, and the U.S. constructed a series of forts and trading posts along the Gulf and Atlantic coast to enforce the treaty. These initial efforts by the Americans forced the Seminoles and Black Seminoles to move further into Florida, particularly Southern Florida and Central Florida. And several Black Seminoles continued on south, leaving Florida altogether and finding a home in the Bahamas. There is a community of Black Seminoles in the Bahamas today, in the town of Red Base to be exact. The Second Seminole War. The Second Seminole War, which took place from 1835 to 1842, marked the height of tension between the US and the Seminoles and Black Seminoles. It also marked the apex of Seminole-Black Seminole alliance. The Second Seminole War began when the United States voided the Treaty of Moultrie Creek and instead demanded that the Seminoles and Black Seminoles move to Indian Territory pursuant to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. In councils before the war, the Black Seminoles threw their support behind the most militant Seminole faction, which was led by Osceola, also known as Billy Powell, who became an advisor to Micanopy, who was the principal chief of the Seminoles from 1825 to 1849. Osceola led the Seminole resistance to removal until he was captured on October 21st, 1837. He and Micanopy were captured under a truce. Within a few months, Osceola would die in captivity of either an intestinal infection or malaria. After the war broke out, Black Seminole leaders such as John Horace, Abraham, and John Caesar, Abraham and John Horace, who is pictured, played important roles. In addition to aiding the Seminoles in their fight, the Black Seminoles recruited enslaved Africans to rebel at the start of the war. The enslaved Africans joined the Seminoles and the Black Seminoles in the destruction of 21 sugar plantations between Christmas Day 1835 and the summer of 1836. In 1838, U.S. General Thomas Jessup tried to divide the Seminoles and the Black Seminoles by offering freedom to the Black Seminoles if they surrendered and agreed to go to Indian Territory. War-weary and truly believing that they would receive their freedom, John Horace was among the Black Seminole warriors who agreed to surrender under this condition. More than 500 Black Seminoles traveled with the Seminoles to present-day Oklahoma. Some traveled by ship across the Gulf of Mexico and up the Mississippi River, and others walked the Trail of Tears. The Third Seminole War. There would be a third war that was fought from 1855 to 1858. By this time, the majority of Black Seminoles had relocated to Oklahoma. The remaining Seminoles fought valiantly to save and protect their land. After a series of battles and while facing starvation, most of the remaining Seminoles agreed to move to Indian Territory. However, an estimated 200 to 500 Seminoles remained behind, refusing to leave. They moved deeper into the Florida Everglades onto land that American settlers considered uninhabitable. Black Seminoles in Oklahoma. The Black Seminoles did not find a welcoming home in Oklahoma upon their arrival in 1842. Instead, they found that they had been placed in a volatile and hostile environment. They would have to contend with their old enemies, the Creeks, who were their neighbors, who often vandalized and destroyed their property. And they also had to deal with the constant threat of slave catchers, who had free reign in the territory and could enslave anyone they believed fit the description of a fugitive slave. They were only in Oklahoma for 8 years before they decided, under the leadership of John Horace, who was the leader of the Black Seminoles, and Wildcat, who was the leader of the Seminoles, to leave. Black Seminoles in Mexico. After an arduous 700-mile journey, the Black Seminoles and their Seminole brethren arrived in Mexico, where slavery had been abolished since 1829, ready to protect the Mexican border. President Vicente Guerrero had ended slavery shortly before he was ousted in a conservative coup. He was also of African descent. In return for protecting the border, the Mexican government granted the group their own land. The Black Seminole settlement was located in the northern part of Mexico, and the name of this land that they could finally call their own was El Nacimiento de los Negros Mascolas. Negros Mascolas is what Black Seminoles are called in Spanish. Although the Black Seminoles made the arduous trek with the group of Seminoles, the untimely death of their leader Wildcat prompted many of the Seminoles to return to Indian Territory. For the next 20 years, from 1850 to 1870, the Black Seminoles would serve the Mexican government, protecting their land from invaders and raiding parties from Texas. They would become known as a resilient, resourceful, and dependable group of fighters. During their military service, the Black Seminoles who joined the Army would become known as the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. They served from 1870 to 1914 and were instrumental during the Texas Indian Wars. In 1870, the United States Army issued a message to John Horse, the chief of the Black Seminoles. They invited him and his band to come back to U.S. to enlist as Indian Scouts to help fight the hostile Native Americans, quote unquote hostile Native Americans, I should say. In exchange for their service, they would be repatriated to Indian Territory. About 200 Black Seminoles accepted the invitation because they believed that they would be granted land, food, and other provisions, as well as reimbursement for traveling. The treaty was sent from Fort Duncan to Fort Sam Houston, but it was lost. Needless to say, none of the promises were ever kept. The initial group crossed over into Eagle Pass, Texas from Mexico on July 4th, 1870, and they were officially mustered into service on August 16th of the same year at Fort Duncan. The Scouts were moved to Fort Clark in Bracketville, Texas, about 60 miles away from Eagle Pass in 1872. Their heyday was under the command of Quaker and Civil War veteran, Lieutenant John L. Bullis. He and the Scouts enjoyed a mutual respect, trust, and admiration for each other that was unmatched. And this relationship that they had made all the difference. During their service, not a single Scout was killed or seriously injured while in battle. 4 of the Scouts were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for bravery. Their names were Adam Payne, Isaac Payne, John Ward, and Pompey Factor. Adam Payne received his award following an engagement during the Red River War that took place on September 19, 1874. 3 Seminole Negro Indian Scouts and 2 Tonkawa Scouts had been sent out by their commander, Colonel Ranald S. McKenzie, to search for enemies. During their journey, the 5 men were ambushed by 40 Kiowas. The only option was to try and fight their way out and escape. While details about the engagement are unclear, Scout Adam Payne was awarded the Medal of Honor for risking his life to save his comrades. Under fire, Payne engaged the Kiowas, allowing the other 4 men to get away. Payne's horse was shot out from under him, but he was still able to kill one of the attackers and take the horse. Payne was decorated for his habitual courage. John Ward, Isaac Payne, and Pompey Factor received their Medal of Honors in 1875 for their bravery and trustworthiness during a skirmish on April 25th against Comanches who had raided a stagecoach on April 5th and stolen some horses. The 3 Seminole Negro Indian Scouts were with Lieutenant Bullis. They were trying to locate the Comanches who were camping along the lower Pecos River. A battle ensued when they found the Comanches. The Scouts dismounted and positioned themselves behind some rocks to appear as a bigger force. According to Bullis's report, we twice took their horses from them and killed 3 Indians and founded a fort. But the approximately 30 Comanches eventually realized that the group was small and attempted to surround them in order to cut them off from their horses. The 3 Scouts made it to their horses, but as they made their way back to safety, they realized that Lieutenant Bullis had been left behind. Without a second thought, and while under heavy fire, they turned around and rescued their commander. Even given these exploits, back in the town of Brackettville and around the fort, the men and their families faced racism and other harsh conditions. They were often accused of and arrested for stealing and numerous other crimes. They would often flee to Mexico for refuge, returning only when the heat had died down. Even under this constant scrutiny, the men continued to serve bravely and valiantly. In 1878, Colonel Mackenzie was recalled to the fort in order to lead an expedition against the Kickapoo. This campaign effectively marked the end of the Texas Indian Wars. Most of the indigenous inhabitants of the area had either been killed or moved to reservations. On February 23rd, 1893, the scouts fought one last skirmish against Mexican bandits at the Las Muillas Ranch. Again, excuse my pronunciation. 30 miles north of Fort Reinbold in Starr County. The Seminoles continued to live on the fort until 1914, when they were unceremoniously disbanded. Some returned to Mexico, some stayed in the Brackettville area and other surrounding towns. The Seminole Indian Scouts Cemetery. The Seminole Indian Scouts Cemetery was established in 1872. Among those buried there are the 4 scouts who earned the Congressional Medals of Honor: Adam Payne, Isaac Payne, John Ward, and Poby Factor. While it is a historic landmark, the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery is a sacred place for us. For many of us, multiple family members and dear friends are buried there. And for many years, the cemetery was the only place that was ours. So as a group, we have always made sure to keep the cemetery clean and inviting for those who visit. We gather there once a year during our Seminole Day celebration to honor the memories of those who have passed. And now I'd like to move into talking a little bit more about what we are doing in the more modern times. So we'll jump ahead to the 20th and 21st centuries and what's happened since around 1914, since the group was originally disbanded up until today. The George Washington Carver School Grounds. When Fort Clark Seminole Negro Indian Scout Detachment was disbanded by the US military on September 30th, 1914, the Seminoles were required to relocate to Brackettville. They held school in their church until new grounds were purchased by the Brackett Independent School District in March of 1919 from J.F. Maddox for the purpose of providing a site for a colored school for Brackettville Seminole Negro community. The old Maddox homestead, a 2-story limestone structure built in 1870, served as the building for the school, which was named George Washington Carver School. The first floor was used for classrooms, while the second floor was leased to the Black Masonic Lodge until 1923. In 1930, the structure was condemned as unfit and unsafe for school purposes. The second story of the building was thus removed in 1944, and the first floor was remodeled inside and stuccoed on the outside. And as you can see, this is what it looks like today. The building was again used as classrooms for the primary and elementary grades, while high school classes were conducted in another building that was completed in early 1944 by the 162nd Engineer Squadron of the 2nd Cavalry Division, then stationed at Fort Clark. At the time, Carver School was the only accredited Black school between San Antonio and El Paso. The Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery Association was deeded the school grounds by Brackett ISD in November 1965. The original stone schoolhouse has served as a meeting hall and cultural center for the Brackettville Black Seminole community and is where we celebrate our Juneteenth celebrations and our Seminole Day celebrations each year. The Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery Association. The Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery Association was founded in 1967. Ms. Charles Emily Wilson, who was an educator, was our organization's first director. She would go on to become the matriarch of our community. She started our Juneteenth and Seminole Day celebrations. SISCA's main goals are to preserve, maintain, and promote the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery, where our ancestors are buried, and to raise awareness about the 4 Medal of Honor recipients who have been laid to rest there. Seminole Days and Juneteenth. Ms. Charles Emily Wilson began our Seminole Days and Juneteenth celebrations in the late 70s. They didn't really take off until the early 80s though. Each annual celebration with it has its own special traditions. Juneteenth, which is now a national holiday, is the celebration of Texans who were enslaved learning that they had been freed. It had taken 2 years for the news to travel to the port city of Galveston. Juneteenth is also celebrated in Nasional. And Seminole Days is a 3-day celebration. It feels like a family reunion because we get to see old faces and meet new ones. This is a time to learn about our history. And after not being able to meet since 2019, we are certainly looking forward to this year's celebration. Negros Mascogos. As discussed earlier, El Nacimiento de los Negros Mascogos was founded in 1850. More than 170 years later, the town and its residents continue to thrive. They are proud of their Black Seminole heritage. There is a pride and tenacity that seems to permeate its sky and grounds. The folks of Nacimiento are learning their history, celebrating their culture, especially their food, singing the old Negro spirituals, and taking care of their cemetery. We are connected by history and blood, and our connection continues to strengthen and grow. The Seminole Negro Indian Scouts Museum. On April 25th, 2015, we opened our museum. It's called the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts Museum. It is small, but we are so proud of it. A lot of love went into each picture and artifact that is displayed. Everything was donated by either descendants or friends of Siska. The museum gives us a chance to tell our story in our own way. AfroSeminole Creole. On Juneteenth 2020, we officially began learning AfroSeminole Creole. And if you remember, I first spoke about the Gullas who spoke Gullah or Gullah Geechee, which is an English-based Creole with some African loanwords. They carried this language with them into Florida. Then it went with them to Oklahoma, down into Mexico, and finally back into Texas. Unfortunately, there were many factors that would see the near extinction of AfroSeminole Creole by the time I was born. There was often a lot of shame felt by those who spoke this language. And there was always a lot of pressure to assimilate to the dominant culture and language. And as more of our elders pass away, we have come very close to losing it. But hopefully this story has a happy ending. And in so many ways, we have been so lucky. During our first meeting on Juneteenth, we had the pleasure of having Dr. Ian Hancock present. His presence was significant, incredibly important, and very emotional because he is the linguist who has studied ASC since the late 70s. He came to Brackettville and got our elders to speak in order to document this language that they thought was just a broken English. Instead, AfroSeminole Creole is a testament to the resilience and tenacity of a people who often were placed in predicaments not of their choosing. Dr. Ian has quite literally written the book on ASC. His book is our source material that we're using to learn AfroSeminole Creole. And he has been gracious enough to continue teaching us. And I've realized he is not only teaching us our language, but he is instilling a heavy dose of pride in us as well. And I don't think I will ever be able to adequately thank him enough for all that he has done and is doing. So what I would like to do now is share a few of my favorite AfroSeminole Creole words with you. It's not a lot, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. The first one that I think is important to learn is, or that I thought was important to learn was hello. So we're going to skip to the second one here. And so I asked, well, how do you say hello? And the phrase for hello is how hana da do. And so it's basically saying, how are you doing? And if you want to get really short with it, you can just say how hana, you know, how are you? And so out of that comes you, which is hana. And I just think it's such a sweet word. It also almost sounds like honey to me. So you have you, which is hana, and then the phrase for hello, which is how hana da do, or how hana. My absolute favorite word at this point is probably the word day clean, and it means dawn or daybreak. And what I've discovered in learning Afroseminole Creole is that the words are very practical, but they're also extremely poetic in their own way. And to me, day clean is a beautiful example of the practicality of it, because you think, you know, every day is a new day, so the day is clean, it's a chance to start over. But you know, only in this language would they think to put those two words together and make it mean, you know, dawn, daybreak. Another favorite word is chukla, and it means girlfriend or boyfriend. And I like it because it's just a fun word to say, chukla. And during the last Zoom that we had, Dr. Ian, and I hope I'm not misquoting him, but he did say that he didn't know the origin of the word just yet. So it'll be fun at some point to find out where this word came from. You know, is it a, you know, an African loan word, or is it, you know, somehow Spanish, or is it from another language that could have been picked up somewhere? So, you know, the fun part of this language is learning, you know, the etymology of words. And of course, thank you is an important word. So in ASC, you say thank you, and you often repeat it. So if you want to emphasize, you say thank you, thank you. And then finally, another beautiful word or phrase is the words for goodbye, which is walk good. And again, I'm just struck by the beautiful image that that gives. And it's sort of a reminder to whoever you're telling this to, you know, be good in the way that you step from here on, you know, walk good. So, you know, I've fallen in love with this language, and I think I'm so lucky to, you know, be a part of this revitalization. It's amazing and humbling to be a part of all of this. And I hope to just continue to learn more and to grow confident in speaking it publicly. So that's the goal, is to be more confident in speaking it. That's what I'm working on right now. So in conclusion, I would like to say that we, the Black Seminoles of Mexico and Texas, are very proud of our heritage. As a unified group, we are coming together and working together to teach ourselves and others about our rich history. In both towns, our cemeteries are incredibly sacred to us. Giving our dearly departed loved ones a final resting place that is peaceful and clean is very important. In addition, we are striving to revitalize those things that we once thought were lost. This includes the old Negro spirituals that were sung way back in the Low Country region of the United States, when many of the Black Seminoles were enslaved, and the language known as Afroseminole Creole that has its roots in Gullah Geechee. We are proud descendants of these people who sought freedom on their own terms, and each day we strive to make them proud. And in closing, I would like to say or speak the quote that Ms. Charles has here. There is great power in one. This is what I always want, that one more person should know our history, should know our story. Ms. Charles Emily Wilson. Thank you.
Wendy, thank you so much. You have told almost 90 people, not just one, your story and shared it with them. And so I think that the ancestors would be pleased. Our audience has already posed a number of good questions. As you said in the very beginning, it is a complex story. So some of the questions go back to some clarifications. And our first question is for you to clarify the difference between, I guess, the definitions you're using of Indians, Native Americans, and the Seminoles. Can you sort of explain that for us?
Yeah, certainly. I was wondering if I should go even further and say Black Seminoles and Red Seminoles. That's one way to have a distinction between the two groups. But whenever I say Seminoles, I am talking about the Native Americans who were once Creek and other smaller groups of Native Americans that came together and identify as former members of that group. And then Black Seminoles are those who are African descent, who have Native American, who are culturally more Native American, yet are phenotypically African in their look. But to be honest, it's very complicated because while there were two distinct groups, there was, and I didn't talk about this, there was a lot of mixing within the group. So it's a very mixed group of people. So, someone can call themselves Black Seminole, but might look like what you would think a Native American might look like, and vice versa. So, it's very complicated in answering that. But yeah, there are two distinct groups, but within that, there was a lot of intermarriage, and there was iterations of, completely separate from the other groups to completely a part of the other groups. So yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, and I hope I answered it well.
You did help to clarify that, I think. Okay, so now we have a two-part question. This sort of piggybacks onto the last one, and it's asking, how did the Black people mesh with the Indian people? Were they, asking about that relationship, were they escapees? And then the Choctaw, the attendee is commenting that the Choctaw, who live between his house and in Northeast Texas and the Seminole area, they had many slaves. Yeah. So he's asking for some clarification there about, are they escapees? Were they enslaved by the Creeks and the Native Americans there? So that's the first part of his question. I'll stop there and let you answer.
And that's a great question. Part of the reason why the Creeks initially broke away from the larger group of Creeks was because one of the moral differences that they were having was they didn't agree with the larger group's stance on slavery. The larger Creeks had decided to adhere more to the European, or now at this point, American standard of chattel slavery. And that's why they were part of the civilized tribes, because they took on more American, I keep saying European, but American standards. So the smaller group of Creeks that broke away did not agree with that. So, and Florida at this point was Spanish territory, and everybody knew if you can just make it to Florida, you have a safe haven there. So there was the group of Creeks that broke away because they didn't agree with what their larger group was doing, and they eventually became known as Seminoles because they broke away or ran away from their group. And then, I always think it's so ironic that there was also this group of, formerly enslaved Africans who also broke away, ran away into Florida, and would become known as Black Seminoles or Black runaways as well, because they were essentially doing the same thing. They were getting away from whatever, larger issue was keeping them from being free and feeling, safe in their own environment. So initially, that group of Africans that went into Florida were escaping slavery, but within, a generation, there were, people that were born into freedom and would not know slavery at all.
Myself there. The second part of the question is our participant is commenting that he needs to read more about the trip into northern Mexico and their stay there. But he's wondering, how many were in on that trip? And I think you suggested that there are some descendants that still live in Mexico.
Yes, certainly. Everywhere they went, there were descendants that stayed behind. So, of course, there are majority Seminoles in Florida. So the group that we know in Florida today are the descendants of those people that did not leave. So they stayed behind. Then Oklahoma, there are Seminoles and Black Seminoles, of course, in Oklahoma, and they're fighting, the Black Seminoles are fighting a lawsuit to be able to claim their Indianness and be a part of the Seminole Nation more fully. So there's definitely a group there. And then into Mexico, Mexico was the only government, the only entity that kept their promise to this group and actually gave them the land that they said they would. So, El Nacimiento is sort of the promised land. And it's amazing that, 170 years plus, it's still there. So there are still descendants that live there. And are very proud, as I said, of their Black Seminole heritage. They're fully aware of who they are, where they descend from. And then, of course, we moved into Texas, and that's how I ended up here. My family stayed in Brackettville.
Thank you. That helps. Does the young generation use Afro-Seminole Creole words?
No, and that's why it's so important for us to revitalize it. I didn't grow up knowing the language at all. The last person that I knew who spoke it was one of my uncles. And so this would have been early 60s when desegregation happened. He started going to the, what we call the big school, the public school here. And he was speaking Afro-Seminole Creole, and my grandmother was told, if you want for him to do well at the school, he needs to speak proper English. So, that was, and that uncle has since passed away. He would have been in his late 60s, early 70s now. So that was the last person that I personally knew who spoke it and didn't speak it anymore. And then there were elders, for instance, we had 3 elders that passed away in 2020 who were fluent speakers. But it almost has become sort of a secret language where if you don't already know it, I don't know if there's an invitation to learn it. It's like if you spoke it already, it was spoken sort of in secret among the elders. But the younger kids, because I guess they didn't think the language was something that was important for them to learn because it would probably do more harm than good, which of course is not right or true, but it just wasn't passed on to the younger generations. So, we're trying to change that. And I think one of the first things we have to do is change the stigma that has been placed on it. And that's something that Dr. Ian talks about just about every Zoom, is just removing that idea that this is, language that sounds broken, like broken English, or, that it's not something that was put together by people who were, in very tough situations, being very smart about how they then had to communicate with each other. They just sort of cut out all the fat, so to speak, in order to communicate with each other.
So interesting. One of our attendees has picked up a piece of the language that you taught us. She says, "Tanky, tanky. This was fascinating." Another guest. Another guest says, "Were Black Seminoles part of the Buffalo Soldiers? If yes, about what percentage of Buffalo Soldiers were Black Seminoles?"
Oh, wow, great question. I know for sure that we have one Buffalo soldier buried in our cemetery, but they did cross the Black Seminoles would often lead scouting expeditions for the Buffalo soldiers, so they would go ahead of them scouting. And you know, I don't have a lot of research in this, so I'm just going to answer to what I know. But I know that the Black Seminoles would go scouting ahead for the Buffalo soldiers. And I know that we did have a lot of people within the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts who, if they didn't fit in, you know, if they weren't white, if they didn't look white, then they were sort of lumped in with the Black Seminoles or the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. So if a person looked Black, they were Seminole Negro Indian Scout because that's where they fit. So saying all that, yes, the way that's been told to me is that the Black Seminoles are Buffalo soldiers because a Buffalo soldier is basically just a Black soldier, but Buffalo soldiers are not necessarily Seminole Negro Indian Scouts because they weren't a part of that detachment necessarily. But there is someone that you should check out. His name is Alan Mack, and he's an amazing historical reenactor. And I need to pose that question to him so that I can get a better answer. But he's amazing. If you look him up, his name is Alan Mack, and he does amazing videos about Buffalo soldiers.
Great. Thank you. Was George Washington Carver a member of the Black Seminoles since they named the school after him?
Another great question. No, he was not. He was just a towering figure who was I guess an example of Black excellence. And that's why that school is named after him. But no, he was not a Black Seminole. But great question. I've often wondered, yeah. But that, there are a million schools named George Washington Carver, and we fell into that too with naming the school.
Okay. Now this is a question that you and I discussed when we first met, talking about what must be your very unique DNA. And the question is there an online DNA group focused on Black Seminoles?
Another great question. No, as far as I know, there isn't. Leanna, did we talk about the Cherokee? I don't remember if we talked about that.
I don't know that we did.
But, and this was about 10 years ago that I read an article stating that, a lot of people who believed that they had Native American ancestry were taking DNA tests and were disappointed because of the low percentages of Native American blood DNA that they were receiving. And it was discussed, or there was a discussion that the Cherokee Nation was going to start their own DNA testing. But I don't think that has ever gotten off the ground. And again, that was about 10 years ago that I heard it just first discussed. I think it was a New York Times article, because they realized that, with DNA testing, you need a large swath or pool to choose from. And I think at the time, people who were getting their DNA tests were not of Native American descent. And so they were expecting, hey, I've always been told that I'm part Cherokee, my blood should say this, but no, the blood that's already being tested is more European, more African. So I think what the answer is, there needs to be more Native American blood in the testing, and you'll get better or more Native American results if that happens, or if they do it exclusively. So I think that, that's something that we should all look out for and see if that does happen, because it's an interesting study.
And you know, I think that it would be too, and you're right, that that's definitely part of the issue, that there are so few samples in the database that it's difficult to glean much information from it. The more people test, the more samples there will be to build those definitions. Yes, you're absolutely right about that. Someone would like to know, how about your own lineage? How far back can you trace your DNA, or not your DNA, but your lineage, your ancestry?
You know, in fits and starts, I've been able to trace back to my great grandmother, who was who I know for sure was in Mexico and eventually came to Texas. I'm on my maternal side, I'm the descendant of two scouts, Joseph Phillips and Joe Remo. So, you know, I've been able to just find names of them, and so I'm rambling, but I'm still learning a lot about my own heritage. So as far as right now, I'm able to trace my great grandmother, whose name I believe was Elizabeth Washington, back into Mexico. So I would like to see if we can go further, but yeah, I've kind of hit a dead end there. And that's something that I do want to get into more. It's been a couple of years since I've done that. Once I hit that wall, I kind of stopped, and I'm kind of disappointed to say that. But yeah, there are so many people within the community who are tracing their lineage and having and finding a lot of success with that. So that gives me a lot of courage too.
That's great news. Yeah. The more information that everyone builds, the more you'll have to piggyback off of.
Exactly.
So tell us if the Black Seminoles are considered a triethnic isolate group. Someone has asked that question and has triethnic isolate in quotes for us. So have you heard that specific term used?
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with the term triethnic isolate. So is it, you know, does that mean three ethnic groups that are isolated within certain contexts? Is there?
That's the whole question. So maybe that person will chime back in and give us a little more information. In the meantime, let's see. Oh, could you explain the two different terms? The Seminole Indian Scouts Association versus the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts Museum. What's the relationship between those two entities?
Well, you know, something that I've realized since I've become more involved with the group is that the word Negro is used intermittently. Sometimes it's, so the official military documents name the group as Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. But in a lot of our just everyday dealings, we use the shorthand of Seminoles, which, you know, I think more we are trying to say Black Seminole, just so that we are separate from the Seminole group. But, you know, among ourselves, we've always just sort of called ourselves Seminoles, not realizing that there might be confusion with the Seminole Native Americans. So in the naming of the cemetery, it was called the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery, just because I think that shorthand was in play during that time. But, and that was, you know, back in 1872, and then the signage was made in the 70s. So that was still carried on. But then when we named the museum in 2015, we added the word Negro because we were going with what was official. You know, the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts is what the government called the group. So we wanted to make it as official as possible in doing that. So yeah, you do see the word Negro. And, you know, to be honest, Negro is still a word that not a lot of people like. So, you know, it is sometimes difficult to hear that. And I completely understand that.
Okay. Interesting question. Any information about the history of the Bowleg family in Texas? I am a Bahamian, and we have Bowlegs here.
Yeah, you know, I actually did a Zoom, I think it was last year, with a descendant of the Bowlegs. And yes, we actually have Bowlegs descendants in our group. They were very prominent in our, muster roll that the military has. The Bowleg name has always just been one that stuck out to me because I've always just thought it was a cool name. But yeah, the family is very prominent. And yeah, I would say we need to get y'all all in touch with each other so that, but no, the Bowlegs are definitely a part of, still very prominent name.
Okay. We have more thanks. One attendee says that you've done a great job. Thank you for helping to preserve and share such important pieces of history. And then we have more of a follow-up on the Bowleg question. It says, I am intrigued with the Seminoles and the Bahamian. I am Bahamian, and we often use the word date clean as opposed to dawn. Yes, can you elaborate on this Red Bay's Bahamas connection? Is there an active community there?
There is, and actually there's a book that I would encourage you to read called The Black Seminoles in the Bahamas by Dr. Rosalind Howard. So from my understanding, the first group of Black Seminoles went into the Bahamas around 1821 when they were being pushed, further south into the Bahamas. And I think the first name that they had was for a gentleman named Scipio. And I forget what his last name was, but his name can kind of be traced through all of this different paperwork that's seen, him moving away from Florida and into the Bahamas. And actually what I've been told is that Bowleg, yeah, I see Scipio Bowleg. And so from what I've heard is that, and personally, I want to go to the Bahamas because what I've been told is that, they still speak AfroSeminole Creole there. And again, because they've been so isolated, they speak the purest form of AfroSeminole Creole. So, it makes sense that it would sort of, you might use phrases because there is a group that's still speaking a very pure form of this language. So yeah, we hopefully will be headed to the Bahamas sometime soon to do some research.
Wendy,
Go ahead.
Is the title of the book that you just mentioned on your bibliography?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And for those of you who may not have seen it in the chat, Wendy has got a handout for everyone. And when we finish up here, Linda will be emailing that out to all participants, whether you were able to log in today or not. So you'll have that resource available for you. We have an addendum to a question that we were talking about, which was your own genealogy, that you're doing done some work yourself and among the group. What are the most rich sources of records for those doing genealogy on Black Seminoles?
Oh gosh, I would say we have a great oral history tradition that has served us well. I would also say military records have been very helpful. Something that I feel like we need to do more of, and what I've been encouraging people to do, is look more into Mexican official documents, because Mexico's government had great documents for the period that the Black Seminoles first went into Mexico. They have great records. The only problem is they haven't been translated into English. So that's a whole field of scholarship that has been untapped up to this point. But I would say, if you know that you have a connection through the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, exhaust all military records that you can, because they've done a great job of preserving. And of course, we found discrepancies, but it's great to still have that document there. And ask questions of your elders. Sometimes you just have to ask, and then they'll start talking and give you information that you think, why haven't I known this years before?
I think some of our elders of all ethnicities and generations are guilty of that. Once you ask, if you know the right thing to ask, you're going to get plenty.
Yeah.
We have a comment. Thank you. Have been to Fort Stanton in New Mexico, and I would have so liked to have had this information under my belt at the time. Wonderful presentation. And the name of the Buffalo Soldier living history gentleman that you mentioned, that's Alan Mack, M-A-C-K, isn't it? Okay. Have you done a DNA test?
You know, I need to send it in. I have a DNA test sitting here. I need to go ahead and send it in. I don't know why I procrastinated for so long. So I need to just go ahead and do it.
Wendy, on your handout, do you have your contact information?
I do. And I put my phone number as well. So you can call, anybody can call. I forgot to put my email address. I don't know why I didn't put my email address, but you can give me a call. I will answer. I don't screen phone calls. So.
Well, and Linda, if you don't mind, could you put her email address in the chat if someone would like to reach out to her? Okay.
And she has it already, right?
She may have. We have so many questions. Please be patient as we go through them. Is there any genealogy person that you recommend a person contact? We have one guest who believes they are a descendant of one of the Payne or Factor lines.
Yes, can I get that person's email address and I can send their information to the person that I'm thinking of? I know there's a Factor who's doing research, and I think it would be, great to put them into contact.
Okay. Please send us that email if you're still out there listening, and we will get you in touch with Wendy, or you'll be able to email her directly once we post her information. Okay, we're back to the what are triracial isolates.
Yes.
And this person says that the Locklear's family, at least on her father's side, once belonged to a segment of the population which in academic terminology is referred to as a triracial isolate, which is a community of individuals whose ancestry is a mixture of European, Indian, and Black who intermarried only with each other.
Okay.
Does that sound like an accurate description? Did that sound like an accurate description to you?
I'm not familiar with the term. I would say I would like to learn more about that, but what I can say is that there was a lot of intermarriage within the group, especially when they got into Mexico, there were intermarriage because they were a small community and they only knew each other. I'm thinking of, isn't there a group in Appalachia that's also being researched because of their isolation? Is that sort of?
You may be thinking of the Melungeons.
Melungeons, yes. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I can't accurately answer that. But I think there was a lot of intermarriage, but also once they got into Mexico, they did start marrying Mexicans that were there too. So I don't know.
That adds another layer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a question all the way from London.
Wow.
Can you recommend any good online resources? So will your handout also have some online resources in it?
Not exclusively. Well, I recommend our website, but all of the things that I recommend are books that could be purchased. Other online resources. There is this one children's book that is exclusively online that I think is a great introduction to the women of the Black Seminoles, and I hadn't thought to put that on, so I'm on the spot right now. But if that person can send me their email, I can send them the PDF. It's through UTSA, and the book was published, but now it's exclusively in a PDF form. And it's a beautiful book that I think, everybody should read, and it's in English and Spanish.
Great. Okay. Well, all of our attendees are going to have your email address, so they can reach out to you for. Yes. And if you think of some additional online resources, then you can share those with them. Absolutely. Little pop culture question for you. Please discuss the role of the movie Lone Star in acknowledging the place of the Black Seminole. Was the information in that movie accurate?
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Is there a particular context or scene? Is there a character that they...
I'd ask that the person that posed the question to follow up with us on that. I'll be honest, it's been so long since I've seen it, I don't recall. Linda, do you remember what this could refer to in Lone Star? Okay.
I do not, I'm sorry.
Were the two Paynes who won the Medal of Honor, were they related?
I need to find that out. I was just looking at that question, and they have to be related in some way, but I'm just not sure how closely they are related. So that's something that I need to find out so I can answer the question more accurately. But yeah, one of the crazy things is that Adam Payne's name is often spelled with an I instead of a Y. But that's just something that happened when his name was being written in records and stuff. But typically it's with a Y. So and for a long time I think people thought they weren't related because of that spelling. But I'm quite sure that they are related in some way, just don't know how closely. But great question I need to answer.
Someone chimed in when you were saying that you could not remember the name of Scipio's last name, and it was Bowleg, yes. Let's see. The name. I think we've covered all the books that are going to be on the list. What do you know about the work of William Porter and its impact on recording the history of the Seminoles?
Oh, it had a huge impact. And I believe I recommended one of his books in the reading list. William Porter, Kevin Mulroy, William Loren Katz, I think they all sort of wrote books that laid the foundation for all the scholarship that's followed since then. So yeah, Porter's work is incredibly important. And I would say it might be a denser read with a lot of dates, but if you're interested in learning the history, you should definitely read his work, yeah.
More thanks on your great presentation and very interesting discussion. With the push to give more respect to Native and African history and symbols, do you find it problematic that the Florida State University still uses the Seminoles for its team sport name?
Oh, great. I don't think that's really my place to answer that. I think that has to do more with the Seminole Nation of Florida. And from my understanding, they have approved of them using the image of them. I definitely understand how it's problematic, but from my understanding, the college did go to the group and ask if it was okay to continue using it, and they gave their approval. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But I think it's strange that we have any images at all, So, but I think if it's used respectfully and we're not making a caricature of the group or trying to disparage them in any way, having an open dialogue is what's most important, and acknowledging that, there might be some people that feel uncomfortable with that is important.
Okay. We did receive the email of one of our folks that was asking a question, and we'll see if we can't save our chat so that we are able to go back and follow up with some of these questions. Someone asked if you had a book, and if so, where they could find it. And I know that you don't, but that might serve as good encouragement for you to begin to put some of your things together.
That is good encouragement. I do write a monthly article for a small newsletter called Indian Voices. So if you think about it, you can find me there. So, and mostly I'm writing about matters involving Black Indians, whether it be history or current events. Yeah. So yeah, I do write for them monthly.
The person who asked about Lone Star did follow in with a little bit more explanation. And one of the major characters in Lone Star was Black Seminole, and included a museum of sorts in his bar. And that bar served the African-American soldiers at the nearby Army base. And then another guest chimes in to say the Lone Star was correct, that it was a brief discussion in the movie about Chief John Horse and the fight for freedom. And it says also, if you go to NMAAHC, which I'm going to guess is New Mexico African American Historical, maybe Commission, that's a guess. You will find the 4 Medal of Honor awardees and Chief John Horse. So sounds like maybe you've got some streaming to do tonight. Yeah.
Amazing resources. Yeah.
The Black Seminole character was played by a man named Otis Payne, coincidentally.
Wow. Okay.
For those of you in the chat, if you have not, or who are listening, if you would notice the chat, Linda has posted some notes about resources that the library has available there. So if you would like to follow up on those, you can. We have, again, Tanky for this presentation. Also, could you include the list of words shown in this presentation in the follow-up packet? So you might want to prepare a little resource there that we can share with folks. We can do that later this week as you get that ready. And one guest mentions that you should check out Valor Across Texas, the Congressional Medal of Honor in Frontier, Texas, if you have not already, which has brief biographies of the 4 Black Seminole winners.
Okay. Thank you for that.
You said that you had written an article. Where could our guests find that?
It's in online. It's indianvoices.com, I believe. Let me make sure I'm giving you the right information.
While you're looking that up, I'll mention that I have been thus corrected. The abbreviation is the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which I totally should have known.
Yeah, it's indianvoices.net, not .com.
Indianvoices.net. Okay, so they can check out your article there. And my goodness, I think we have reached the end of our comments and questions. I want Linda to chime in and back me up there that we have indeed covered everything.
I think you have. I think we've got it. And I was just kind of checking in our catalog for books as I heard them mentioned. I did not go through the list one by one, so probably others on the list that we have. Also, if you did not receive the handout that I emailed earlier, I'm going to type my email address into the chat, and you can send me an email And Wendy, did you want to share the word list and I can send that out as a follow-up too?
Definitely, yeah. And I could add more words to it as well because we have the whole dictionary. So if people are interested.
All right, there's my email if you need it.
Okay, great.
And we have a couple of more follow-up questions that are coming in as we wrap things up. One asked us to repeat the name of the museum, and that is the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. And it's in Washington, D.C., of course. And then follow-up question, what do you see as next steps for the group?
There are several things that we are doing. Of course, continue learning Afro-Seminole Creole. That is definitely my main focus. But for the group, I think we would like to work more with our kin in Nasional and help to make them or make it easier for them to come back and forth to the US. So we would love for them to be dual citizens, just like the Kickapoo who have federal recognition, because the Negros Masculinos believe that they are American. They wouldn't have left America had it not been for them running away from slavery. So that's a bigger fight that's a lot more nuanced, and because they don't want to call themselves Native American, they want to be African and still be able to be acknowledged in this. It's not as easy as just saying, okay, well, we can apply to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and do that. So that's the longer fight, is hopefully securing some type of dual citizenship for them, so that they love Mexico, but still they have a right to be here too. So that's the other thing that we're working on.
That's wonderful. Along those same lines, another one of our follow-up questions is, our guest has read about the tensions that arise sometimes when African Americans attempt to claim Native American or Indian rights. Have you had any of those experiences in conjunction with the Seminoles?
I think I'm the exact opposite in that I get wary of claiming too many Native American rights. I'm very sensitive to that, and I don't really know why. I just and I feel like everybody within the community has their own personal feelings about how Native American am I, and I feel like that's something that they personally should ask and answer for themselves. I have not had an incidence of someone feeling that I've overstepped in my claims of Native Americanness, because I feel like I claim my Africanness a lot more. And of course, I feel like that has to do with the way that I look. I definitely look African. So I feel like just from way back, I've always just understood that I am African, and that my ancestors took up with Native Americans in order to survive. And yeah, it's kind of a difficult question to ask. I don't want to, but yeah, I don't think I've ever tried to play at being Indian, because I just feel like it's so disingenuous to do that, given the struggles that Native Americans have had in this country. And also as a Black person, having our own struggles in this country, I definitely am aware of that too. So I hope I answered that in a somewhat coherent way.
We have more thanks for your very nice presentation. We have a question about the final burial location of John Horse. Do you know that?
From what I understand, I don't know where he is buried. He, there were several attempts on his life, and he died, I think, of pneumonia, but I might be wrong about that. I feel like there might be someone who can answer that. But no, I don't think it's known where he's buried.
Okay.
And I did see someone ask about the spelling of my name, so I can answer.
Go ahead, yes.
Yeah, the spelling of my name is not Native American. The story that I was told was that on the night that I was born, it was a windy night. And so they decided to go with the weather. So if it had been sunny, my name probably would have been Sunny, but it was windy. So that's how I ended up with the spelling. It was left to chance.
Well, it is very distinctive.
Oh, thank you.
Let's see, another final comment. It looks like when the Dawes Commission job was over, there was a separate list for the Black Seminoles. Maybe much of a clash between Indians and Black groups over lands given, etc.
I've been researching what's happening in Oklahoma. And if anyone has the time or is curious about that, what's going on there is just really interesting. They were originally on the Dawes rolls. The Black Seminoles there were on the Dawes rolls as part of an agreement. I believe it was following the end of the Civil War. So in 1866, all Native Americans agreed to free their enslaved Africans. So from, I believe, 1866 to 1979, all Black Seminoles were a part of the Black Seminole community because they could trace their lineage to a name on the Dawes rolls, whether freedmen or whether by blood. But in 1979, there was a commission that was brought about by the Seminole Nation in Oklahoma that effectively removed anybody who was claiming Black heritage, but couldn't back it up with by blood heritage, meaning they couldn't trace it to someone who was Seminole Native American on their rolls. So, this had been over 100 years of Black Seminoles in Oklahoma believing that they were, regardless of the color of their skin, accepted by the Oklahoma Seminole Nation as a member of their tribe. So, what's going on now is they've had a lawsuit, and the lawsuit, I think, was denied. And I believe they are trying to get the Supreme Court to rule on this matter because, during COVID-19, they were denied access to certain access to treatment and things that their Seminole brethren had because they were Native American. So there were a lot of implications because of that. So, and this is real world, real life things that happen because of the denial of their Indianness. So, and the interesting thing is, what you were asking earlier about, have I ever been confronted about my Indianness? I think because in Texas, we're so far removed, we don't have a, the Black Seminoles left Oklahoma. So we didn't have a Seminole Nation that was with us. The Seminoles went back to Oklahoma and Mexico. So we didn't have a Native American group to compare ourselves to. We were sort of our own little small group. But in Oklahoma, they do have that comparativeness. What is what are the Native Americans getting that we are not getting? So with them, I think it's, sort of, they're able to see the unfairness, for lack of a better word, that's happening a lot more clearly than we have because we're not as closely, involved.
It sounds like a good explanation for part of why that is, definitely. When you all were your own group down here. A couple of comments about following up on John Horse. Some of our guests commented that they thought he died in Mexico and was believed to be buried there. Saying that some, on a separate question, some individuals have claimed the title of chief of the Negro Seminoles. So what is the relationship between the tribal structure and the Seminole Indian group that you're part of, the Cemetery Association?
Yeah, so we don't believe that we have any chiefs. We, as I said, Miss Charles was our matriarch. It was a title that was lovingly, used to refer to her. But we do not recognize anyone as a chief at this point. John Horse was, I believe, the last chief that we had. We did have Mr. Willie Warrior, who passed away in 2020, who was also named a chief. And, I think that was said out of respect because of who he was among the group. But, Siska does not recognize anybody as a chief. We see ourselves as, we might loosely refer to ourselves as a tribe, but that's not in the, actual structural sense of a Native American group. So, we do have to be careful with the words we use, but more than anything, we are a community. And, we are definitely aware of our attachment to Native Americanness, but we, don't have a lot of the structures within, that Native Americans adhere to. So no, we don't have a chief.
Okay. Someone is wondering if you have relatives in Wewoka, Oklahoma?
I don't believe I do. I am familiar with Wewoka. I know that it's the city that John Horse founded, right? And they have an amazing museum there from what I understand. So I need to get there and visit.
A little bit of a research trip in the offing, it sounds like.
There in the Bahamas.
Okay, so we are bumping right up against 12 o'clock. So I've got one more, we've gotten several more thanks and appreciation for your very fine program and discussion. But I will wrap it up with one other comment. And this guest says, thank you so much for your willingness to share. It's an awesome presentation. Understand the desire and the need to keep the Afro-Creole languages alive. I experienced that desire because of my great-grandmother and grandmother who were from Louisiana by way of Haiti. I understood it as a child without realizing I did until my grandmother realized I understood what she and her best friend were discussing.
Oh, amazing.
So they were using it as a tool at the time.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yes. Well, as we wrap things up, we just want to thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. We are sorry that you could not be with us in person. We had looked forward to that. But we may have reached more folks by ending up Zoom only. So we are just really pleased to have had you today. As folks think of more questions and review the handout, there may be some additional follow-ups, and we'll do our very best to get everybody the information that they need. You can always reach out to me or to Linda, and we will do our best to connect everyone. Linda, do you have something else to add?
I do not. I just say thank you to everybody for joining us this morning. It was a great presentation, and thank you to Wendy. Very informative.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, and I will add that if any of you joined us, oh, I'm sorry.
No, thank you so much.
Well, I will add that if any of you joined us late, give us 7 to 10 days and we will have the recording of this program on the library's YouTube channel. So you didn't necessarily miss a thing. And with that, I will just say thanks again for everyone in our audience who joined us today. Thank you, Wendy. As always, Linda, we appreciate you hosting and doing our tech for us and keeping us live. So with that, everybody just have a great Saturday afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.